Every so often we come across a scripture passage that we're so familiar with that we really are called to stop and almost listen to it for the first time, so that the text itself or the scene itself or the message that God has for us can really fall afresh in our hearts. And I think today is one of those as we look at the gospel from the Gospel of Luke chapter 10, and we hear this wonderful story of Martha and Mary. And as I say Martha and Mary, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about because you've heard the passage so many times. And we all have our own understanding of either what we've heard about that passage in the past, what God has said to us through the passage, or maybe our own opinions of how we find ourselves in life and how that passage might speak to us. But I'd like to take a look at it today from a fresh perspective so that God can perhaps speak to the things that dwell deep in our hearts. Of course, we know the scene. It says that Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. So Mary is there listening to Jesus speak. Of course, Martha is busy about doing many things, as you know what the story unfolds. I think Martha gets a bad rap. I think a lot of times what perhaps we have heard or what we simply presume is that Mary was getting it all right and Martha was getting it all wrong. Martha was busy about incidental things while Mary shifted her whole perspective because she knew what the most important thing was, which was Jesus. But what I love about the story is not necessarily the priorities of who had it right or who had it wrong, but I love Martha's heart. Martha was not afraid to go to Jesus with everything that's in her heart. I think Martha really shows us what freedom's about, insofar as that instead of holding on to the things that were moving in her heart, Martha actually went to Jesus. She spoke to Jesus. She related everything in her heart to Jesus. Instead of holding on to him and becoming dominated by him, she actually goes to Jesus and she shares everything in relationship with him. And what was Martha sharing? I think Martha was in some way sharing her slowly building resentment. She's in the kitchen. She's busy about a lot of things in life. Her sister's not there with her. And there's this resentment that begins to build up. And I think a lot of us know how dangerous resentment is. I think resentment comes from expectation. We have expectations about what our lives should look like, and sometimes we resent the very situations in life that we find ourselves in. I think a lot of times we have an image of what we want our life to look like, and so we have dreams when we're younger of what life's going to look like when we're 30 or when we're 40 or when we're 50. And I don't know anybody whose life has turned out to be the exact way that they dreamed it would when they were younger. Life unfolds very differently. We move from one city to another city, and that wasn't in the plans. If we're married, our kids enter the equation, and that very beautifully is a gift from God, but a lot of times that really kind of shifts life's direction and life's focus. Our spouses never meet our expectations. Our spouses never are as perfect in reality as they were when we were dreaming about life when we were younger. And so a lot of times I think what happens is life doesn't meet our expectations. Perhaps you got sick, or someone in your family got sick, or your parents got sick and you're taking care of them or someone else or yourself. Sometimes life doesn't meet our expectations, and it's easy for us to resent the very situations that we find ourselves in. Sometimes the people who are closest to us don't meet our expectations. That could be your spouse. Small little thing. You wanted them to say something and they didn't say it. You wanted them to respond a certain way and they didn't respond. And those little small resentments kind of slowly build up every day. They're little things that hurt us, little expectations that were not met. But they can build in our heart, and eventually there's almost like a mass of resentments that are then projected toward the other person, and it blocks relationship. Just imagine what would have happened in Martha's relationship with Mary if she would not have shared her resentment with Jesus immediately. Let's just presume, for the sake of the example, that Martha doesn't talk to Jesus. And after Jesus leaves the house, Martha carries this resentment toward Mary. And if they don't talk about that, then eventually that just kind of builds up. Now, and especially with Jesus, who is the Messiah, that then affects her relationship with him. So it's easy for us to have resentments toward the people in our life. And I think a lot of times, finally, it's easy for us to have resentments toward God. Maybe God didn't answer a prayer you wanted. Maybe God was slower to answer a prayer than maybe you would have liked. Or maybe because life unfolds very differently and we don't know how to handle the tragedies of life. We don't know how to handle the difficulties of life. It's easy for us to blame God, I think. People say things all the time like, God won't give you more than you can handle, or everything happens for a reason. And very reverently, very respectfully, let me say that I don't think either of those things are true. I don't think God gives us more than we can handle, because I don't think God gives us difficult things for the sake of difficult things. I think life happens. I don't think God gives us the difficulties of divorce, or the difficulties of illness, or the difficulties of tragedy. And I think life happens, and I think that it's easy for us to blame God for all the circumstances of life. And I'm not quite sure if everything happens for a reason. I'm not quite sure if it's as easy for us to just kind of lay down that blanket statement to somehow understand a very difficult situation in our life. So the encouragement for us today is to understand how easy it is for unmet expectations to lead to resentment. And when resentment is not shared in relationship, resentment becomes a barrier to relationship. So the beauty of Martha is that she shares her resentments to Jesus in relationship. And notice how quickly she's liberated. She hears from Jesus the answer. She sees Jesus respond to her needs. And I'm sure that probably wasn't the end of the conversation. While the text in the Gospel of Luke ends there, I'm sure as the evening drew on, as she spent more time with Jesus, that resentment was completely alleviated, or she was able to ask follow-up questions to it. The most important thing today is, I think, for us to learn from how Martha shares her heart with Jesus, to look inside our hearts and to ask ourselves, are there resentments about life toward other people that we love the most, or toward God himself? And as we learn from Martha, let's share our heart with Jesus in relationship and allow him to free us from our resentments.